welcome everyone to NWAC Avalanche Awareness course. I'm Gene Kelson with the Mountaineers, and this evening we have Bernd Bittelmeier to lead us with his presentation. And I want to thank Bernd for joining us this evening. We appreciate NWAC's support in providing this education. So Bernd, I'm going to hand it off to you and let you share with us.
Great, Gene. Well, thank you. And thank you to the rest of you for showing up tonight. And hello to the Tacoma Mountaineers. I'm also a fellow, well, past Tacoma resident. So I lived in Tacoma, but I moved to Lake Tapps because that's where my partner and her kids lived. But I've been a member at Edgerix Climbing in Tacoma for quite a while, and gotten down to the Tacoma Mountaineers gear sales fairly regularly when we were allowed to do those things. And I've also helped out with the decision-making seminars for the intermediate students. So it's always nice to talk to people from my home turf. So again, thanks for coming tonight. Very informal. Let's just ask questions if you have any. And so here's a little bit about me. Skier, mountaineer, occasional ice climber, because in Washington State, it's kind of hard to be a regular ice climber. And so most of the time I'm recreating in the snow or inside avalanche terrain, backcountry skiing, or mountaineering. And then the picture on the right is just a picture from Mount Adams. I've been a volunteer with Tacoma Mountain Rescue for about 16 years, and we were lowering somebody down most of the mountain because they were glissading with crampons on there. And so glissading, for those of you that don't know, is sliding down the snow slopes in your butt, because that's easier than walking downhill and a lot more fun. But if you have crampons on, so there's sharp, pointy things that you walk up the snow with, those can catch and kind of snap your ankles pretty easily. So just kind of like snowshoes, normally you should take snowshoes or crampons off before you scoot down a snow slope on your butt. But cool thing about Northwest has a lot of different ways to recreate. A little bit about the Northwest Avalanche Center. Again, it's a partnership. So the Forest Service provides a lot of funding, and especially weather forecasting stations. And then the Avalanche Center is really the nonprofit arm, which allows for the education, outreach, and before COVID times, the community events, such as lane tracks and other things, which were kind of field-based learning opportunities. But most of our education this year has been via Zoom, right? So thanks, COVID. But it's a really important partnership because a lot of the funding and then the weather forecasting directly allows us to provide avalanche forecasts, which is a huge part of what we want to do. And so unfortunately here we have a little 2-minute ticker. And for people that are listening to this recording, you also have a 2-minute ticker. And again, this was that QR code we had at the start of the class. But if you can't access the QR code with your phone, there's also a hyperlink here, www.nwac.us/class. This is a quick survey, which we try to get. Again, the Forest Service, we like to report demographics, who are we reaching? So age, user types, etc. And it just allows us to focus our outreach better. What this will also do is you'll get a follow-up email. You're not going to get a bunch of spam, but you will get an email after the course asking for your input and kind of just general consensus for how the class worked for you. So please take this last minute we have now to do that survey. It's pretty quick. And if anybody has any questions or you're having issues, again, unmute, just shout it out or type it in the chat, and Gene's monitoring that. Or we'll have time for Q&A afterwards, and so we can always address it then. But we do like to get this taken care of. And so class location can be online, but the location is really the Tacoma Mountaineers are hosting, right? And that allows us to see that. And so Bell is one of our Forecaster's retired avalanche rescue dogs, but she likes playing in the snow. All right. Almost there. Thanks for putting up with that. And there's the reward. Who doesn't like watching puppies run around in the snow?
Go. Yep.
Breaking trail, breaking trail.
Oh, go.
All right, thank you, Belle, with the double L and an E at the end. Okay, let's just move on along. Cool. And so here's a quick little slide for the interactive, but again, we're not a huge group here, so feel free to stay unmuted. Definitely feel free to use the chat. No need to raise your hands. And you know, we definitely try to ask for your feedback during some of the slides. But again, if something I say doesn't make sense, or if I speak too quickly, or if your bandwidth kind of augured in, I'm here for you, right? And that's kind of how we want to keep it. And so frequently we'll ask, you know, the groups back in the past when we came to physical locations, we'd look at all of you and you'd raise your hands. We talk about the different user groups. Sounds like today, the group we're speaking with is a snowshoeing group, but maybe in the future with the Tacoma Mountaineers, we'll have other user groups, right? But for today, okay, we have some snowshoers. Snowshoeing is really fun. A little different terrain than you might get into with backcountry skiing, right? Or of course, splitboarding or snowboarding, right? We have to be all inclusive here. Snowboarders like to travel in the backcountry too. And then a really growing group is the snow machine, snowmobile, or the sledders, right? Depending on if you're in the group, you call yourself different names. And you know, we also had a recent fatality in Washington State involving the snow machiners, right? So it's really popular. And then also winter climbers, right? So ice climbing, you know, mountaineers going up steep snow slopes, but also ice climbers. And it's something that sometimes people don't really think about, but why are ice climbers maybe at risk for avalanches? Anybody here? Let's check and see how your microphones are working.
I don't know the answer, but maybe if snow is on ice, it's more likely to fall off the, I mean, if you're seeking ice, snow on ice would be more likely to fall off ice. I have no idea. I'm just telling you my mic works.
That's true. Well, I'm giving you a verbal high five. Yeah. So what kind of, where does ice kind of form for climbers to climb it? On like ridges or like drainages?
I guess drainages. I mean, places where.
Yeah, drainages, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're frozen rivers, basically, right? Or frozen waterfalls, right?
Right.
And so those are funnels. And so not only can water funnel down into that, but then also snow potentially, right? And sometimes that snow melt then refreezes into the waterfall down below. So it can all depend. But sometimes you can have larger snow slopes above these ice chutes or ice funnels that are refrozen, that have melted and then refrozen. And those can be really problematic. Yeah. And this can happen especially in like really like larger ice climbs where there's like these huge snow bowls above it, and those kind of melt and then refreeze down below to form the ice. But if you have a thing called an inversion where the temperature above is a lot warmer than below, so we'll have like freezing rain in Snoqualmie Pass. But if you go higher up into the mountains, so Chair Peak, the Tooth, something like that, up in the snow towards Snow Lake, Source Lake, it can be warmer as you get higher. And that's really something we don't really anticipate, but you could be maybe on a frozen waterfall, but it's 5 or 10 degrees warmer above you. You don't know this. And now that snow can maybe get soft and slide down on you, right? And so for snowshoers, obviously you're not snowshoeing up a frozen waterfall, but inversions can also be problematic for you, because if we go up to, again, I-90, maybe Commonwealth Basin, right off the pass there, easy access, you're in a nice big open valley, everything's cool, but if it's warmer than freezing above you and you're not aware that there's an inversion going, then potentially that could be melting snow, getting it heavier, and then it comes down onto you. So snowshoers really don't usually travel in, like, on the avalanche slopes, but you can be under those, right? And be unaware of the risks posed by the slopes above you. And
Makes
similarly
sense.
with ice climbing, but it's just kind of the inverse, where like snowshoeing, we like it relatively flat. Well, ice climbing, they like it pretty vertical. And so in both those terrains, you're thinking, I'm not in avalanche terrain, but it could be above you, right? And so similarities exist with snowshoeing and ice climbing. But again, like, avalanches are an inherent risk of winter travel in the mountains, or just driving over mountain passes sometimes, right? I mean, frequently this winter, Stevens has been shut down occasionally, even Snoqualmie, because there's an avalanche risk, or there's snow on the road because avalanche occurred, and you're going to mitigate that risk. But regardless of your travel type, accidents and fatalities occur. Again, even in your car, right? Sometimes cars get buried. And so we just need to be aware of that and understand that, like, we hold the key, the majority of the time. And so tonight we're going to be talking about those 4 white bullets, right? So the risk, we're going to talk about the Northwest Avalanche Center as a resource. I'm going to briefly list rescue gear, and then identify the need for continuing education. And so Gene and I were chatting before the Zoom started about how it's really nice to get like bite-sized chunks of this information, to digest it, maybe apply some of it when you go out in the field, and then come back to a different avalanche education seminar and get some more information, and then go back and apply it, because it is truly a lifelong learning process. Because you always realize the more you know, the more you really don't know, right? And with snow, that's especially that as well. But that's all scary stuff. But the reality is we want to do all these things and understand where to get the information, because we want to go do what Dallas is doing in this picture, right? Playing in the snow, being excited, etc. Okay. So first off, has anybody heard the term backcountry before, other than shopping at backcountry.com?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. And so for those of you that have heard the term, what do you think about it? I mean, we have a little definition there, but what comes to mind when you think backcountry?
I always just think of, like, any of the mountains I go to where there is a trail, being someone that is willing and interested in going off the trail. But that's more like backcountry hiking. Well, I don't even know if people use that term, but then I just imagine these like pristine snow bowls that aren't part of a specific ski resort that you see these people, going down on their own.
Yeah. So kind of open, pristine areas, or maybe well traveled, right? But still, yeah, kind of open areas. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So we've kind of listed here, it's basically anywhere outside, somewhere where they try to mitigate the avalanche risk through, demolition or some sort of other means, right? And so ski areas, highways, or maybe snow play areas, or especially highways and ski areas, they do avalanche work, And so as the risk goes up, they'll set off some detonations, they'll cause the avalanches before people introduce themselves into the mix, right? And so anywhere where there isn't avalanche control work is really considered backcountry. And again, like, you can still have avalanches inside these areas. We have avalanches inside ski areas frequently, or along the highways, but typically we tend to think of the backcountry as anywhere outside of those areas. And frequently at like the ski areas, you'll have something like that sign that's here, where they have warnings, they have a stop sign, they have a backcountry policy, they have the little danger rating, you know, they have like 8 different ways of alerting you that there is potentially a hazard behind this sign, right? And so if this was like a chemical plant and we'd see all these signs, we'd probably stop and read all of them before we open the door and walk into some room. But outdoors, we're just distracted by the sun and the snow and the fun and the freedom. And sometimes people kind of breeze by these things. They kind of just look at it and you glaze over and you keep going. And so what we're trying to do tonight is just make people understand that when you go outside of these areas, like your decision making really makes or breaks the day for you. And we're going to give you some tools to utilize, like the danger rating, which is in the bottom there, the black, red, orange, yellow, green, along with the forecast to hopefully make better decisions about the terrain you're entering. Okay. And so we've kind of talked about the backcountry, right? And so that's places where we don't do avalanche work and avalanches can occur. But then let's talk about, well, what is an avalanche? Okay, so can you guys maybe list some ideas about what you consider an avalanche to be?
Snow tumbling down a slope and gaining speed.
Sweet, there we go. That's about right. I can't say it any better. I like the word tumbling. Okay, so yeah, it's a massive snow sliding downhill or tumbling. Tumbling is a lot more poetic. And then, of course, it's typically going downhill. That being said, if it's a very narrow canyon and it's moving very fast and there's a lot of momentum, it can sometimes move up the other side. And that there's a couple places near Stevens Pass where that occurs, like Königsberg Mountain and such, where you think like, hey, I'm in the flat, or maybe I'm on the other side of this really big, scary looking slope over there. And you think, well, I'm out of the way. And you may not be, right? And so that's just like local knowledge and understanding the terrain and realizing how big the problem can be. But yeah, it's snow moving downhill at a high rate of speed. And this can be down a slope. This could be off your roof, right? So roof avalanches occur. And occasionally there's like fatalities in Washington when there's huge snow dumps, like in central or eastern Washington on roofs. People are clearing that out and then they get buried, right? And the neighbors don't realize it. So I guess your roof is also the backcountry, right? And so here are 2 pictures. The top one is a larger avalanche, which you can see kind of took out most of the slope. And then the bottom one is a smaller avalanche where it's kind of a inconsequential, right? You're like, oh, that's cute. That just moved downhill. But utilizing those smaller slopes as you're moving through or underneath or around avalanche terrain and causing small avalanches of your own potentially without consequence, you know, without fear of getting buried, that can lead you to understand what's going on in the larger, you know, terrain around you. So some are big, some are small. But really the big ones are really what we're concerned about, right? And so when we talk about avalanche accidents, you know, we're speaking about when people get buried, and that might be a partial burial or it might be a complete burial like we saw in the video. But out of the accidents reported, 90% of the people caused the avalanche or somebody in their party caused the avalanche. And so what does that mean? What does it mean that 90% of accidents are triggered by you or somebody in your party?
Something about our responsibility, both to know,
so
to the terrain and to know how to get ourselves out of it.
Yeah. So recognizing avalanche hazard, recognizing terrain, and then if something does occur, getting yourself out of there. But yeah, I mean, that's a good number, right? Like if we say, hey, look, 90% of avalanches occur because of you or some of your party, you're like, cool. If we make good decisions and stay out of avalanche terrain when risk is high or higher, then we can mitigate or minimize the probability of being caught in an avalanche. If we said, 10% of accidents were caused by you, and the other 90% are just random luck. That's scary, right? So you're in control. 10% of the time, it's just like, man, it was somebody else above you or just freak of nature, right? Earthquake. But the fact that 90% of the time it's you or somebody in your party, like that's kind of a good statistic in a way, right? Because it means that if you make concerted decisions and identify the hazards and the avalanche terrain, then you can really minimize your risk greatly, right? So as scary as it is, it's also like kind of a, you know, it's a, I guess a good number, right? And so we need three things. Yeah. So we need three things to cause avalanches, right? So we need snow, but we really need unstable snow, right? Because if it's super stable, it's just not going anywhere. And then we need some sort of slope, or we could call it avalanche terrain. Because if it's flat, well, that's just a snow field. And if it's vertical, then there's probably no snow stuck on it. So it's somewhere in between, which is usually like 30 to 45 degrees is kind of prime, waiting for the trigger, meaning you or somebody in your party, to get that snow to move downhill. If it's shallower than 30 degrees, it's pretty hard to start avalanches. They can occur, but it's pretty tough. And if it's steeper, frequently natural avalanches would occur. And so that'll kind of minimize the risk. Or we just also frequently don't like recreate in that kind of stuff. So 30 to 45 is where we ski, where we can climb up, where we can snowshoe up like 30 degrees. We don't snowshoe up 45 degree slopes. That's crazy, right? If you do that, you're just really hardcore. But if those slopes are above you, and we can identify those slopes as being above you, and the avalanche hazard is higher, then you can realize that like you want to stay out from below those kind of slopes, right? But we need those three things to occur. And so again, you or your party are 90% of the time going to be the trigger for avalanche that you're going to get caught in. And so that's, again, good. And so we can't take the trigger away because you're there. And so for you, it's really to identify unstable snow and then to stay out of or away from avalanche terrain, right? And so we'll talk about all those three things. And so what the Northwest Avalanche Center is here to do is to provide mountain weather and avalanche forecasting, especially avalanche forecasting, which is on the left side there. Education outreach, such as the conversation we're having tonight, and the community events. And again, that's kind of, you know, once things open up. But the website's great. We don't have an app. We used to, it broke. And so instead of trying to deal with that, they made the website more mobile friendly. So www.nwac.us is the website to go to. If you go to avalanche.org, oh, I don't know what just happened there. Oh, I clicked on a hyperlink. Okay. Nope, go away, come back. Okay. If you go to avalanche.org or avalanche.ca, Canada, you'll see kind of the Western US or Canada, and you can see the other forecasting centers. So if you're going to a trip to Colorado or to California or to Wyoming, you can access local information there through avalanche.org. Likewise, if you click on the area where the Northwest Avalanche Center covers, it'll go to our website. Okay. And why are we the Northwest Avalanche Center and not the Washington Avalanche Center? Besides the fact that NWAC sounds cooler than WAC, right? Why are we the Northwest Avalanche Center? Any guesses? You can't really see it on this slide. That's a hint.
Well,
does that extend almost to Oregon?
Ding, ding, ding. Sweet. Yes. So right here, right underneath all the Washington stuff, there's Mount Hood, that kind of large circle in northern Oregon. We don't cover the rest of Oregon, but we do cover Mount Hood. Yeah, so we cover, let's go back to current. So we cover all these zones and then also Mount Hood. Yeah, so that's why we're the Northwest Avalanche Center. That sounds a lot cooler than just the Washington Avalanche Center, right? We're regional. We're branching out. And so big things you can go and get from our website is the danger rating. And so that's that red, black, orange, yellow, green, no rating scale. And then also the bottom line. And the bottom line is something that the forecasters type up kind of in plain English without a bunch of jargon. And that's kind of their synopsis or the takeaway of what's going on in the snowpack. So instead of saying something like, you know, there are facets buried below wind slab, blah, 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 and use all these different jargons, they'll say like, stay away from steep slopes that are north facing in the shade. You're like, cool, I know what that means, right? And so they're trying to really kind of explain it and take a lot of the snow terminology out. And so out of the triangle, right, there's terrain, there's unstable snow, and there's a trigger. Let's first talk about unstable snow. Again, here's Belle on the left, looking all cute, wearing a nice little collar, watching Dallas look at snow crystals, right? So he's trying to identify where the unstable layers are, put it on the website so that you can just read it off the website and you don't have to go into the backcountry and dig pits and get your gloves all wet, right? Because that's not fun. And that takes time. It takes time away from snowshoeing and enjoying the outdoor experience. So let Dallas dig in the snow and get all cold and wet so we can just go to the website, get the info, and we'll have fun. The next slide is a video that tries to show how different layers are made. The snowpack's made up of different layers. And they're gonna show like kind of multiple storms coming through. And it's gonna show settling. It's gonna show melting of the snow. It's gonna show it kind of blowing around. And this is what creates layers. And the big thing is when there's differences in those layers, maybe the top layer is really heavy and the bottom layer is light, or maybe there's a little rain crest that froze that lets the top layer slide on it. When you have these differences and it's not cohesive, that's what creates unstable snow. And so it's more of a cartoony video, but it kind of helps show you. So we have a little melting, another storm, ooh, wind. And right there, those little feathers, that's what we call faceting. And so that's what happens when it gets really cold after a storm and kind of the moisture gets sucked out. And those facets are really nice and pretty and light and fun to ski on. But if those get buried, then that can create issues in our snowpack. That's one example. And so you could think of it as if you took a bunch of champagne flutes, right? And it'd be more fun if there was champagne in it, but there isn't. So we're just gonna layer them out on the floor. And then we're gonna put a bunch of textbooks on top of those champagne flutes, right? In compression, they can support those textbooks, right? But the minute we took those and we put them on a slope, they'd probably start crashing and breaking, and those heavy textbooks would continue to go down the slope, breaking more of those champagne flutes, and they just keep moving until they got to the bottom of the slope. And so that's kind of how those facets can work, where they're pretty strong in compression, but when you put them on a slope, they can just kind of create this like kind of ball bearing layer for these slabs to roll down. And so that's kind of those feathery things. Okay. And so with unstable snow, we're gonna look at the website to look at the danger ratings. We're gonna have examples of the bottom line that kind of plain speak about the takeaway from the snowpack, and then we're gonna have some pictures of red flags. And so the first two are things that you could go to the website before you go out snowshoeing the night before, and you could look at that information. And then the red flags are what you're observing throughout the day as you're traveling, right? Because we're still responsible for our decisions. And so red flags are the observations that you're making, and you can determine like, this was part of the forecast, or I don't remember reading this last night. That's weird. Maybe we need to rethink what we're doing, right? And so the danger scale is this color scheme with the numbers. And that's significant because you can be like, whoa, it's red. That means stop, right? And for me, like, oh, it's a yellow light. That means go faster through the intersection. And then orange is kind of in the middle. And you really need to think of orange as like orange and black striped is a tiger. And so that's just kind of waiting to eat you. And that was the rating that we had in that Switzerland video, right? Where it's dangerous avalanche conditions, but people interpret it as, well, it's not red, it's not high, it's just considerable. But considerable means there are, if we can read that travel advice column, there's dangerous avalanche conditions. You need to have careful snowpack evaluation, cautious route finding, and not or conservative decision makings. That's a lot of like scary things with and, right? It's not just like one thing, it's just lots. And so that language on the travel advice, like it's there for a reason because they really want you to pay attention to all of those. But typically orange is the day after the storm when it's like sunny and everybody wants to go recreate because there's all this fresh snow. And that's where a lot of people get caught on considerable days, because on high and extreme, we're like, we're going to stay out of the backcountry. But orange is kind of that, well, should we go or should we not go, right? It's my day off. It's a Saturday. I want to go out and do something. And so the travel advice, if you just read that, it again clues you in on what am I looking for, okay, or what are the considerations.
I have a quick question on like timing of the updates, because I know on
Sure.
NWAC, I think timings are like at 7 a.m. and 2 p.m. or something. So if you're looking, is that accurate?
Yeah, they're made in the evenings. Yeah. So at 6 p.m. they'll update it for the following day. So if you log on at 5 on the website, it'd still be from that day. So you want to log on after 6, and they'll have the tomorrows and then frequently the next days. But that next days could of course get updated the following day if there's new information found. Yeah, great question.
And does it change much? Like, how frequently does it like massively change overnight? I mean, assuming, you know, you'll know if there's like a storm coming, but I just mean more on like a regular basis is checking the at 90%, you know, confidence.
You know, I don't have any numbers for you. I think frequently it's directly or it's related to like how accurate the forecast is, right? And so if they're like, whoa, Friday and Saturday, there's gonna be tons of snow both days, but maybe the storm comes in sooner and maybe it's not as severe later on, then they're like, oh, okay, well, we thought Saturday there's gonna be a foot of snow, but maybe there's only 4 inches. So maybe it's not quite as high. So it just really depends on how accurate the weather forecasting is. And as we know in the Northwest, you know, it's pretty reasonable. But there are sometimes, you know, changes to that. But frequently, I mean, you know, if the weather forecast is off by a few degrees or an inch or two, it's not really going to change the danger rating. That's just more stuff that we like notice, right? You're like, oh, I thought there's gonna be more snow, but there isn't. But you know, if it's 6 or 8 inches, that's still a lot of snowfall. So even if the forecast wasn't quite right, possibly dangerous avalanche conditions could still, you know, be present, and they wouldn't necessarily update the danger rating. And so examples of how considerable and low are different are just highlighted on your screen, right? So in low danger scale, it's generally safe avalanche conditions. They just want you to look out for isolated terrain features. So maybe stay off of north-facing slopes, because maybe a bunch of wind blew snow onto that slope, and that's waiting for somebody to come trigger it. So there's like one thing. So if you're like, okay, it's on a low day, we're just going to stay off this one feature that they identified, and we should be generally okay. But if it bumps up to considerable, then it's like dangerous avalanche conditions kind of everywhere, and you need to be really careful and cautious. Does that help answer your question? I mean, I didn't really give you any numbers.
No, that was helpful.
But,
just to understand.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah. Okay. And so on the website, there's the danger scale along with the travel advice, and that travel advice is generic. That never changes. That's part of a card that we try to use in kind of all of North America, right? We try to kind of keep it consistent. So if you go to California, Wyoming, danger level should be the same. That travel advice is the same. But that pairs up with the bottom line on our website. And so they're still showing, oh, okay, It's a yellow day, right? So let's go back one more so you can read it. So that's a moderate day. So a moderate day says there's heightened avalanche conditions on specific terrain features. We need to evaluate snow and terrain carefully and identify those features of concern. So basically we need to be really hyper aware of the features where these avalanche conditions occur. And so the bottom line that would go with that would say, look out for steep slopes where wind drifted snow could be forming into slabs. Some of these wind-loaded areas may hide in a few inches of soft snow. And then also use cornices and drifts to help identify and avoid locations where wind deposit, okay? So the feature of concern is wind deposited snow. We'll have some pictures of a cornice later, but a cornice is basically a snow feature that frequently forms along ridges where the wind's the greatest, and it kind of looks like a crashing wave that you could go tubular on underneath, or maybe it's just like a little bit of a plank, but it's crashing towards the direction that the wind traveled, okay? And so if you see it kind of like a rip curl, logo or something, and it's kind of going kind of clockwise, that means the snow went from the left to the right, and it's blowing all the snow onto that leeward side. And so that's then where you might be on the windward side, where all the wind came from. It blew most of the loose snow away, and you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is really stable. But if you get on the other side of the ridgeline where all that snow was moved to, now that could be ready to await you, the trigger, to rapidly move downhill, right? And we'll have some more pictures of cornices here in a little bit. And so red flags, okay? So top left, recent avalanches. Bottom left, kind of both sun effect and also wind effect. Bottom right, recent snowfall, right? You come back and your car's buried. Probably had a lot of fun that day. And on the top right is what we'd call a shooting crack and or womphing. And that's kind of what it sounds like. And so those are some things that we can be looking for while we're traveling in the backcountry. And if we're seeing avalanches occur around us, then we know that, hey, the avalanche risk is high, or the hazard rating is high, because we're seeing these occur. And we don't want to be in that terrain or underneath it. So it's all happening on one side, because maybe the wind put all this snow over here and now it's coming down because it warmed up. If we're not in the wind affected area, we might be minimizing our risk, right? Cracks and wumps. So have any of you been like snowshoeing or cross country skiing or skiing, and you've encountered this, like seeing cracks occur in the snow around you as you move through the terrain?
I have not.
No. And so thinking about like settling pavement, right? Like there's this rigid thing, and then the ground underneath the pavement moves, or the street, and then cracks form. Kind of similar deal, right? So there's like there's instability in the snow. It just happens faster. It happens when you travel onto it, and you cause these weaker layers to collapse underneath the snow that's under your feet, and then these cracks occur. Because maybe that top layer is kind of like a bigger slab, a firmer section of snow. That doesn't give way, but the stuff below it does, and it separates. And so that can be kind of cool to see. It can also be kind of scary, but we tend to see this when we're traveling in flatter or lower angle terrain. And that's not really a problem if you're in that terrain. It's just like, whoa, check that out. But if you were maybe going to go from flatter to steeper and you were seeing this occur around you, then that would be a red flag, because that's an obvious sign of instability in the snowpack. And if that was in the forecast and you knew about it, then that's one thing. But if it wasn't in the forecast, or you thought, wow, I wasn't expecting to see this here, then that's your red flag, right? Your field observation. And then with weather, any big changes, if it's getting warmer, if it's getting colder, if it's raining, if it's really windy, again, if it's in the forecast, then it's probably been put into the data for the avalanche rating. But if you didn't see wind in the forecast, or it wasn't supposed to be really warm, it's supposed to be below freezing, and now it's raining, wow, the snow's getting heavier, right? I'm getting wet, this sucks. But mostly for the snowpack, the snow's getting heavier. And If that wasn't anticipated, then that's a big red flag for you, right? And again, like I always talk about Snoqualmie Pass because I've been there for rescues where it involved that inversion, where it's freezing rain in this parking lot. So you're like, wow, it's so cold, the rain is freezing. You assume it's gonna be warmer or colder higher up, but it's not, right? And then you can maybe go out into the snowpack and recreate in the backcountry, not knowing that the snow above you is getting loaded with tons and tons of rain, and then it may come down on you. Any questions on some of those red flags?
In those situations, like the
Mhm.
one you just mentioned about the inversion,
Yeah.
is that like, say that were to happen and you're not likely to trigger it, right? Because it's above you and it's just the weather has changed. Would the avalanche forecast have reflected that, or is that something that like you should always be also be checking the weather, but like how would you know?
Great question. So it may have, that's that whole thing, like it may have been in the forecast. And then, so maybe they're like, hey, today it's moderate, but tomorrow we were detecting this possible inversion. And then it's going to maybe rain higher up and we're going to bump it up to considerable, maybe above tree line and at tree line, so higher up. But if they don't catch that in the forecast and it's occurring, then that's just kind of one of those, like, that's just kind of almost like bad luck, right? Because it's pretty hard to know, like, hey, my spidey sense is telling me it's raining 1,000 feet above me in these clouds that I can't see through. And that would be just more like, if it's freezing rain in the parking lot and as you go up, it turns to rain, that's a flag that you're noticing, hey, weird, it's not freezing anymore, it's warmer up here. And that's not like, cool, I have Gore-Tex, it's warmer, I'm not gonna be as cold. It's like, hold on, this is a red flag because the snowpack could be getting heavier around me and we could start getting like some wet slides coming down. Yeah. Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Is that
Okay.
I feel like that maybe that's more in like the 10% that aren't triggered.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, I mean, it could be the slope above you, or maybe it is getting heavier because of the rain, and then you trigger it. So it could still be part of that 90%. But you're right. Yeah, some of that stuff could be the 10%, right? So like, and we kind of talked about ice climbers, right? The ice climbers aren't causing the avalanche by climbing up frozen water. But that inversion above them, dumping that big snowball onto them, created that 10%. Yeah, and I've had friends in that exact situation die ice climbing because they didn't realize, or they didn't have access to, 15 years ago, smartphones and weather forecasts, and they were up in Canada and there was an inversion above them and they didn't know about it. And so that's where having the data and getting the forecast and checking it before you go out can help identify that as well. Because I've been in that similar terrain, like I was there last year, and we basically didn't go ice climbing in really big stuff because that forecast was like well known, well identified. It was in the avalanche forecasts, and we said, well, we're just not going to go into big steep terrain, and we just kind of hung out at like small ice cracks to avoid that. Yeah. So frequently it's going to be like identified and communicated if you take the time to look at the avalanche forecast, right? And some people don't even look at that before they go into the backcountry. Yeah.
That's actually what I was going to ask next.
Okay.
Because, this training is obviously really important for people at whatever level they are.
Yeah, totally.
But I know even actually when I was with Jean in the, on our like basic snowshoe field trip like a few weeks ago, there was this slope that, he used as an instructional example of like, hey, I'm going to take like a slightly different angle on this because, this is a chute and whatnot. And then when we got across it, and then we looked up and I was like, Jean, why are there some very clear tracks, like just straight up that slope, which felt like potentially you would avoid if you had this type of training. So I guess
yes,
you have a gauge of like, how many people that we not us, but like that we might run into the backcountry, like how many people actually really get this training?
You know, I don't have any numbers on that. I would say the minority of American recreationalists get any form of formalized avalanche training or education, including something like this. Because a lot of people is like, hey, let's go do this. You know, I saw it on the Instagram, or I was at REI getting something and I saw they rent snowshoes. So I'm going to rent snowshoes and then I'm going to do this. And I just kind of, they look at the, hey, look out for avalanches, but they don't deal with that. And so that's why this program is in existence, is just to create that awareness, right? Like if people are aware that there's a risk or a hazard, then maybe they can take some steps to avoid that. But if you're not aware of that risk or hazard, then you know, there's a high probability you're going to be, you know, a statistic. And it's kind of similar, like in the desert, if you go to around Las Vegas or any of those areas, you know, at some of the washes or the roads, they have like, hey, look out for, you know, water coming over the roadway. And that's a clue for people like from the Northwest, like, oh, we never see that. But like, hey, it may not be raining here, but if it's raining in the mountains, a river might be coming down here with boulders, you know, pretty quickly. And so the Avalanche Center, partnering with Forest Service and ski resorts, like they're trying to post more signs, like, hey, you're at popular trailheads, you're entering avalanche terrain. They even have signs with, so we'll talk about the equipment more, but there's a thing called a beacon or a transceiver, and something you carry on you that transmits a signal. So if you're buried, people can locate that signal. They have signs that say, are you beeping? And that means if that sign isn't beeping, then your beacon isn't transmitting, or it's an indicator like, I'm not beeping because I'm not carrying one, right? And so there's lots of different ways we're trying to create awareness about the hazards. But some people just, you know, don't recognize it or don't listen because we're so involved with all this other noise, right?
So I think that one of the things that is scary to me is that my husband and his buddy are skiers. They're pretty expert skiers and they do a lot of backcountry crystal stuff. And they tell us all the time that they see people going under the ropes into the backcountry. And those are the folks that haven't taken anything and are obviously not paying attention to science, but they're in the backcountry where other people might be too. So your statistics said that 90% of these things are caused by us, but it may not necessarily be somebody in our party. It could be somebody who is out there, you know, on the top of us on a ridge or something.
Yeah. And so that's that 10%, but the majority of the time, you know, 90% of the time, it's going to be you or your buddies that are like right behind you, like causing this. But you're right. And like, if you know, maybe we know the hazard rating is considerable, right? But they have a high level of experience. They understand the terrain, they have the education, etc. And they're like, we're going to go tour. If you're below people that may not know, hey, stay out of that chute because the wind throws all the snow in there, and they're going up that, then they could maybe cause something larger that would come down on the other party. But that's a rarity. Again, like 90% of the time, it's you or somebody in your party that buries you or somebody in your party. Yeah. But yeah, definitely being aware of like users, you know, different various backcountry users, especially above you. It's like that's critical. And we see that in mountaineering too all the time, where like especially like Mount Hood is like super accessible, and people go up the South Side route frequently because it's relatively not less technical. But if you have a rope team above you, people connected by a rope that's all, they can kind of string cheese, you know, additional parties below them with them, right? And take more people with them. And so that's definitely a watch out. Yeah. And so you try to stay away from other parties. You try to stay away, you know, away from underneath them. But most of the time it's you or somebody in your group. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure he comes home with like, guess what I saw today? These people were super sketchy, you know? I mean, but we see that on the drive-through, the Starbucks, you know, drive-through, right? Like, hey, guess what this person in front of me in Starbucks did today, right? I mean, we see that all over the place. Yeah. And so I'm sorry, I didn't see the names pop up
This
when
is
we
Janet.
talked. Cool. Somebody was mentioning like Avalanche Terrain and some chute, that you went around or something. And so maybe that's a good segue to talk about Avalanche Terrain. Okay. And basically it's a slope or a hill that snow can move downhill from. And a big thing where people don't realize is like, if you have a summer hiking book, that's the trail and you follow it. But in the winter, the beauty of it is you can kind of walk anywhere you want because there's snow and you have snowshoes or some other flotation. But summer hiking trails might pass underneath or through avalanche terrain. And so like Granite Mountain is a great example of that, where there's been numerous avalanche fatalities. So that's the mountain off I-90 before you get to the pass. And people think, oh yeah, I hike that, a bunch of times in the summer, I'm gonna go up in the winter. And in the summer, you pass through avalanche chutes. And in the winter, you also are passing through avalanche chutes and you're in avalanche terrain. And so a hiking book may not be the best option if you're snowshoeing or doing something else. A guidebook based on the activity you're doing would be a better reference, right? And so in avalanche terrain, we talk about like a start zone, and then that's where the avalanche starts. The run would maybe be that chute. It continues to travel down, and then it can stop at the bottom frequently. That can be big slopes like this. Frequently there's not a lot of trees. It almost looks like a ski resort area, right? But a lack of big trees, especially in Washington, means that is logging, there was a rock slide or a mudslide, or avalanches occur here, right? I mean, those are kind of big reasons why trees don't live in the Northwest. And so this is like Bullion Basin area. So this is Crystal Mountain backcountry. So we can see some big snow slopes that are devoid of trees, and you can look at that and say, oh, okay, cool. I can see where avalanches might start here, and they'll run down those little like gullies or ravines, because it's a big open slope and there's not a lot of trees. That's very obvious avalanche terrain, right? And it's really fun to ski in. But you wouldn't really snowshoe up that, but you could snowshoe up underneath it. Some of it just isn't quite that obvious, right? So you can see like smaller little meadow looking things where trees are missing, like avalanches could occur there as well. Or if there's a big one, it could push through the trees, and get you as well. But frequently, lack of sparse trees, big indicator for us. Or if not a lack of, the type of, right? And so alder, what's another term we call those? Or what's another word we put in front of alder sometimes? Have you heard the term slide alder before? No, crickets. Okay, so yeah, so alder, so non-coniferous trees, those kind of like slide alder will frequently grow when the coniferous trees are knocked away, but they also survive the snowpack coming down on them, and they'll regrow every year. But it sucks for bushwhacking, right? So the type of vegetation can also indicate whether or not you're in avalanche areas. And so specifically for avalanche terrain, we can take the rating of the day. If it's high, okay, we don't recommend you travel in avalanche terrain. Cool. So if we can identify avalanche terrain, we can stay out of it. We can stay away from the bottom of it, and we can stick to like flat open areas and recreate there, right? Versus maybe on a moderate day, we need to identify the specific terrain features or the features of concerns. And so if the concern is stay off of 40 or steeper degree slopes, cool. Then if we know, hey, this area is like 20, 25, 15, that should be relatively less risky, right? We can't say no risk because the lawyers would get, involved, because there's always a risk when we go in the backcountry. But if we can stay off of these steeper slopes that have been identified, then we can minimize a lot of the risk. And the bottom line is always going to try to kind of verbalize those to you as well. So you can read that and really kind of take that home. So again, on a considerable day, they're talking about stay off the slopes that are steeper than 35 degrees. So they know that there's some areas where the new and the old snow hasn't bonded. That new snow might slide on it, but it needs a steeper slope to really get going. So if you stay on a 25 or 30 degree slope, even though there may not be well bonded snow, it's just not steep enough to move. Whereas if it's a high avalanche day, then they're just going to tell you, if you go out in the mountains, stay away from areas where they can start, run, or stop, right? Which are some of those pictures that we looked at. So now we're going to go to a slide, which is kind of central Washington. A lot of different terrain, right? And so there's evidence of avalanches on this slide. Hopefully you can see it, like the slide, the picture itself. If you're looking on your phone, it might be a little hard. But it's kind of complex terrain. There's gullies, there's little ridges, there's trees, there's rocks, right? There's a little bit of everything. And so can you see any red flags that we talked about, or that I talked about? Listen to any red flags. So any like warming or cooling, any wind, any recent avalanche activity, any cracks, shooting cracks, or one thing.
To the right, you see that there's actually been snow that has tumbled or, run down the slope a bit.
Yeah, so on the right-hand side, big open slope, right? Lack of trees, maybe an indicator, right? It may just be rocky there, and maybe trees don't grow there. But yeah, it's a steep slope, looks really steep at the top, and there's snow that has moved downhill and consolidated. Yeah, and kind of also in the middle of the picture on the far side, kind of along that ridge line, there's also steep enough stuff, right? Yep. And so that could be avalanche, or maybe there's just like goats being crazy above you, and they like hucked some snow down, and that kind of went down, right? But yeah, I mean, who knows? It's steep enough to slide if it slid on its own, or the goats were getting crazy. It's sunny out, so but we don't know, is it sunny in 25 or is it sunny in 35, right? And so the big difference there would be is if you were going to go snowshoeing this area or travel this area, and the forecast it was going to be 25, and you're like, man, it's hot today. I didn't realize it was going to be that hot, and it's like 35, 40. And that's kind of a red flag. That's not what was forecasted. Maybe the snow is going to start getting wetter and heavier. Maybe it's going to, start sliding, right? And so sun itself is an issue, but if it wasn't forecasted, or if it's warmer or maybe colder, then that's an issue. And then we do have a little cornice here. Can somebody see it? There's one that's pretty prevalent here. All right, 3, 2, 1. Okay, nobody's answered. Okay, so in the middle of the screen, kind of at the bottom, so closest to us, there's this thing that kind of looks like a little wave or like a plank, where it's like shaded underneath.
I see, yes.
Can you guys see that now? And so that's a cornice, and so that shows that wind was coming from like the far side and blowing towards us. It formed that, but it also was depositing snow like on our side of that little bump. And so it's not like along the high ridge line, but that is this evidence that snow was moved by wind at some point in time and formed that. And so the cornice itself isn't always necessarily indication of, oh, the world's going to end. But if it was like really foggy or cloudy and you walked out on that and then it collapsed below you, that could be problematic, right? It could dump you in a drainage, or again, in some areas in Snoqualmie, if that's high up on a ridge and there's a 50-foot cliff below that cornice and you can't recognize that, you could fall quite a ways and get injured, and then maybe cause an avalanche that buries you, and adds insult to injury. But that's kind of the picture of a cornice that we have. Usually they're up on the ridge lines because that's where where the highest winds are, but they can form in this kind of complex terrain, right? And then there are like lots of little gullies here. There's a lot of flat areas, but there are like little ridges and gullies. And so on the back side of one of these gullies, maybe you're walking along that and you slip and you fall down that little steeper slope. So you were on the top and you weren't really in avalanche terrain, but now you slipped and fell, right? Because I've tripped with snowshoes before many a time. Trip and fall onto that steeper slope. Now it carries you like into a little ditch or depression. Now you've been buried in a terrain trap, right? Which is that ditch we dig in the sand before we bury our friends with it. And so it doesn't mean we need to stay away from gullies or those kind of things, but if there's heightened avalanche danger, then we want to stay away from terrain that could magnify the consequence of being caught in a small avalanche, right? One example of a big terrain trap would be the Disappointment Cleaver route, the DC route on Mount Rainier. And so this conga line of mountaineers going down, they're going to pass left through some of these rock bands down to a relative flat area. But if a small slope, or I'm sorry, a small slide was created above them, maybe by somebody else, maybe by some of their own party, and then knocked them over these cliffs, that would magnify the consequence of a smaller slide or even a slip, right? And that's why sometimes there's even thick slides here that people can clip to if it's like really bad conditions, because we don't want people falling over those cliffs. And then below these cliffs, you can see in the bottom left there, there's some cracks in the snow. So that's either a moat or a bergschrund or maybe even a crevasse. And there's crevasses below these cliffs because there's a big glacier down there. And that's where the snow's moving and separating. So if you were to get knocked by a small avalanche over the cliff, you'd be like, woohoo, I made it, but continue to fall into a crevasse. That's another example of a terrain trap, right? Where it doesn't take a large slide to injure you because of the terrain around you. And we just need to be aware of that. And if there's a heightened avalanche danger, we want to avoid that kind of terrain. Later on in August, most of that snow where those people are traveling through is gone, and it's just rock. And then people are just kicking down rocks from above you. So instead of avalanche danger, there's rockfall danger. So again, with avalanche terrain, we're looking at start areas above us, or maybe we're in it. We're looking at where the avalanches can run and where they're going to stop. And then specifically, we can take the danger rating in conjunction with the bottom line, which is telling you like where to stay out of it, and try to minimize the consequences of avalanches. And so that bottom right, or the picture on the right, the bottom right there, that's Granite Mountain. And so the winter or the summer trail just like zigzags at whole face until you get to the upper left part, and then you just go up that steep part. And so you're zigzagging these avalanche like run areas until you actually get like the start zone in the summer. And so that's a prime example of summertime cool, wintertime watch out in the identical terrain, right? Okay, so we've already discussed kind of unstable snow, how to recognize it in the forecast and how to pay attention to the red flags. We talked about the avalanche terrain, how to identify it, the start, the run, the stop areas, and how to try to stay away from that if the rating is higher. And now we're just going to talk about us a little bit, because we're the triggers. And that can be your friend skiing, it could be you on a sled, or your friends on a sled or a snow machine, or it could be you just walking up. I think on the right there, that's Panorama Face. So that's just on Mount Rainier there. That's a big avalanche slope, and there's other slopes around there. So again, the good news about triggers is 90% of fatal avalanches are triggered by you or someone in your party, which means we have control over staying out of avalanche terrain and paying attention to unstable snow, right? And then even though we are a trigger, we're not going to trigger a big slide. Okay, so using danger scale, reading the bottom line, and then really choosing your partners carefully, right? So we have those partners that maybe show up unprepared, don't have the layers, forgot to get snacks, didn't read the forecast, maybe didn't change the batteries in their avalanche beacon from the year before, right? And so those are all those like, the Swiss cheese thing where incidents or accidents don't occur because of one thing. It's like many things, right? And it just kind of keeps piling up. And so if we have those partners that are a little sketchy, maybe we only like go out with them when the danger rating is low or moderate. And then if we know that maybe the terrain's a little more complex or the snowpack's a little more unstable, maybe that's when we select our more conservative travel partners, and we can hopefully make better decisions as a group, right? And you can minimize the effect that you have as a trigger by paying attention to the danger rating and reading those bullet points, right? And so I know on a low day, I need to watch for unstable snow on isolated terrain features. But I know on a considerable day, I need to have my head on a swivel and do all these other things, right? Or maybe just stay in bounds. If I feel like I don't have enough information to make a good decision, that's better than ignoring all the problems and making a bad decision, right? So it's good to be conservative, because if 90% of fatal avalanches are caused by me or somebody in my party, if I'm conservative, then I can hopefully avoid being part of that 90%. Right. And so again, as a trigger, what can I do? I can stay on the couch, right, and not trigger avalanches probably, unless I'm in the Alps in a hotel like under a huge mountain, right? Then darn it, I really try my best. But again, choose your partners wisely. Big thing. Pay attention to the danger rating, and then just pay attention to that bottom line and try to stay off of those features. Okay. So again, and that's what you're going to get from the website the night before or even the morning of, right? Just get that information before you go out in the field. Okay, so to kind of review a few points. There's a triangle, right? We need all those three things to occur. We're one of those components, and so we need to be aware of that. But the Northwest Avalanche Center can provide you information with the danger rating and the bottom line, which talks about which terrain to stay out of and what kind of unstable snow to pay attention to, right? And then your trigger friends can hopefully make good decisions and minimize risk in the backcountry. So when in doubt, choose a lower slope angle because they're going to be less prone to sliding. Avoid areas that are avalanche terrain where they can start, run, and stop. And then just stay away when there's elevated danger. Because again, if you feel like you don't have enough information to make a good decision, you're probably right. And make a good decision then by staying out of avalanche terrain. But if we did get caught in avalanche, what are some things that can help increase our survivability, right? So let's talk a little bit, real briefly about avalanche rescue. So these are three tools which you and every partner should carry if you're going to be actively traveling in avalanche terrain. We have the transceiver, or a beacon as people call it. We have the probe, which is that medieval evil looking tent pole with a pointy end on the end. And we have a shovel. In the Northwest, with our heavier snowpack, I'd strongly recommend a metal shovel. The plastic ones just aren't quite as durable. The transceiver, or the beacon, they used to be called transceivers, and I still get stuck sometimes because they can transmit and receive. And so the really smart people are like, let's call it a transceiver. And now it's just a really weird, awkward word to use. And so we call them avalanche beacons. And people can now readily identify with that. But the beacon is basically sending out a signal. Everybody carries one of these. Everybody's sending out a signal. I get buried. Everybody else turns theirs to search. Now they're all searching for my signal. It kind of zeroes in on a kind of curved line until you're within maybe a meter or two, because I'm maybe below you, right? And then you bust out your evil looking tent pole, you poke in it until you feel me, and I go, ah, and then you go downhill and dig me out, right? Like we saw in the video. And so those are 3 essential avalanche rescue tools. Something we don't talk about here are like airbags, which are backpacks that have inflatable pillows, basically, that go around your neck and the sides. And those can help reduce like traumatic injury, and they kind of make you a larger object, maybe a little lighter, maybe a float. But there's just not a lot of conclusive data out there to like definitively say, yes, they're better. But I do own one. I don't use it all the time, but if I'm going on a longer trip or maybe in a higher, danger rating, then I'll use it. But they are expensive, and again, these three things, you want to be able to find your partner, you want to locate them, and you want to be able to dig them out. And so the ARI, or the American Institute for Avalanche Research and Education, they have a 1-day rescue course where you practice this stuff, right? And so right here, we can see that probe that's right in the middle, right, with a little 20 on it, 20 centimeters. So they use their beacons to find their buddy in the ground. They probed until they felt them, and then they went downhill and they're digging into them, right? And that's what we're seeing here. And so it's great to have a course and an annual practice, annually you can practice. And a lot of ski resorts have little beacon areas where they have buried beacons that transmit it, and you can search using yours. And that's a great way to practice and maybe not lose your friend's beacon if the batteries go dead when you're looking for them. Okay. And so what can you do now? Again, go to the Northwest Avalanche Center, read the forecast frequently. A lot of that information is kept in the blog. So even if you went to Hawaii for 3 weeks on vacation, good for you. You come back, you want to go recreating, just go to the website and see what's been going on. Definitely consider Avalanche Rescue. It's a single 1-day course, or a level 2, which is like a 2 to 3 day course. And you really talked about decision making, emotional and mental factors that play in our decision making, as well as the snow and the terrain identification. Again, on lower hazard days, go out, gain experience, right? Try to find those little red flags, or try to identify hazards or features. Try to pair the forecast, the danger rating, and the bottom line with what you're seeing. And really, like, what can you do now is get out and play, right? Because that's the whole idea. We don't want to be scared away from the backcountry or the outdoors. We want to enjoy it and recreate it, but also minimize the risk, because we want to come home to our friends and family every night. And here's a little bit more information, some digital stuff. I really like the Instagram, because we'll have the forecasters go out. They'll have some pictures. I love pictures. They'll show, oh, maybe here's a small avalanche. Maybe here's a big avalanche. Here's what we found. And it's just a great way to kind of see what's going on in your area. And also a good way to keep refreshing, just see what's happening out there. And also, once you start reading their forecasts, it kind of makes the website a little more digestible. Once we start getting seminars going, there's a couple different like physical in the field trainings you can do, and that would be great. But again, the big thing is go to the website and get the forecast before you recreate. And you can become a member and donate to the Northwest Avalanche Center, and that helps fund courses like this as well, right? So any other questions on anything we covered, or something we didn't cover? I can probably give you a non-answer, as far as if you want statistics. But I'm more than happy to field some questions, or have you guys chat amongst yourselves as well. And Jean, again, you're hosting this, and anything you have as well to add, feel free to.
Are there any questions from the students?
I have one. Go ahead.
Out.
Oh, please, go ahead.
I was like, I'm out because I asked a lot during.
I'm a little curious about the range of information that might be conveyed on the bottom line. Like, is it, I think with that in the beginning is what you were saying is pretty human understandable, but are there like things we're going to come across that would be hard to, I don't know, like if it was like southwestern face slope and I'm like I'm not that advanced yet. So I don't know. How applicable are there, or are there things that we can like brush
Sure.
up on to understand what all of this bottom line terminology would be?
Yeah. And so now, can everybody see the website I pulled up on the screen?
Yes.
I went away
Yes.
from the PowerPoint. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So great question. Let's take a look. And again, that's great. Thank you for asking, because the bottom line is like really one of the things that we want you guys to look at and read and try to understand. And so this is the website, right? And so we've had 21 people die in avalanche accidents throughout the U.S. That's a lot. We can see the danger rating is basically considerable everywhere except in the bottom right? We're like, that's weird. Does that mean it's safe? And it basically is no. If it's gray, but see how it has a little blue line around it? That means that basically it's like somebody hasn't gotten out there in a while to dig in the snow and analyze what the weather's been doing and how it's impacted the snowpack to provide a rating. So it's basically like, well, we don't have enough information right now to tell you what's going on in there, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a hazard. And if everything else is considerable, I'd extrapolate that at a minimum, it's probably also considerable. So just because gray doesn't mean that, hey, you're good to go. But if we click on that, see no rating information available, but there's still travel advice when we click on it. And again, there's going to say, look out for unstable snow, et cetera, et cetera. But let's take a look at right here. Okay, so that's like Mount Rainier and like Greater Pierce County. For some reason, let me refresh this. I'm clicking on it and it's not loading. There we go. So let's look at our bottom line and see if it makes sense to us. Okay, so west slopes south. And so above, near, and below tree line, it's all considerable. Frequently, we'll see that maybe below tree line, it's a little more sheltered, or maybe it's warmer, so there's more melt refreeze. Frequently below tree line, it'll be a lower rating, but we just been getting a ton of snowpack, and so there's kind of a ton of snow everywhere, right? And so the bottom line here is, you guys can read it. I'm just going to read it out loud as well in case somebody can't read it on their phone. Stormy weather combined with lingering concerns about several potential weak layers burying the snowpack deserves a conservative approach Friday. Avoid traveling on open slopes, so that's without trees or anything like that, greater than 35 degrees. Okay, that's pretty steep. Limit any time spent in the terrain below, so below that area. Don't hang out below a huge 35 degrees, slope. With all the recent snow, any avalanche could grow large and dangerous, right? And so, because it's kind of an abbreviated Zoom meeting, we don't go into the website that much. I'll just I'll go down. So we have the danger rating, and then they also tell us what the problems are, which we can see here, which is a storm slab, which means it snowed a lot recently. And then the aspect and elevation is the shaded, which means it's basically everywhere. And it's likely that an avalanche could occur, and it's going to be small to large. And so D2 is enough, a large one is enough to bury a person. Very large would be enough to like damage a house. Historic is like crazy stuff, right? And so we know that it's likely that a small to large avalanche could occur on this. And even here, they talk about it greater than 35 degrees.
Yep.
Okay? And then here's a small slab. Here's a photo. Let's zoom in. And so we can see it's a slab because near the top there, that's what we call a crown. That's kind of a big wall. And that just means that whole, like a big thick textbook, that whole slab just like slid down, right? And so they have some pictures there. Oh, another problem is a deep persistent slab. And this is what they're talking about, where there's this weak layer you can see kind of at the bottom here. And all that stuff on top wants to move. You can see there's a couple different layers that are kind of blocky. So that's actually a great picture. So there's like a rain crust and maybe some other stuff going on there. And if that whole block there starts going, that's a lot of snow movement. All right, does that help you guys kind of identify? Okay, not so cool.
Yeah.
See here at the top, there's another crown there that shows a slab. And see, this is cool because they're showing you kind of, oh, these are where the problems are. This is what they're talking. And you don't need to know what thin rime crest is or, interface or whatnot. That's more kind of jargon. And they're not including that in the bottom line, right?
Right.
They're really trying to make it easy to read. That's why it's there. And that's why it's on the top. So we can be like, boom, cool, I'm going to read this first before I get lost in all this stuff. Okay. And then cool, they have like discussion and they talk about COVID pandemic and here's some weather summary. So a lot of good information. But really what we're focusing on is the bottom line and just identifying what the rating, what the danger rating is. For now, it's considerable. Okay.
Super. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And one thing that's not part of the Northwest Avalanche Center, but really briefly, everybody can write down caltopo.com. It's a website. It's free. You can make maps on it. We're not going to do it today. But if you're like, well, I want to go up to Paradise because I heard it's really beautiful, and I want to go snowshoeing, but they said stay off of 35-degree slopes, you can, and it's better on a desktop because everything is. You can go to slope angle shading, click on that. And now anything that's red or purple is 30 degrees or higher. I'm a little bit of a scaredy cat, so I'm going to stay off of 32 to 34. So I'm going to stay off of orange, red, and purple slopes, right? Because I'm more conservative. And so what this can do is not only can you print this out or even upload it onto your phone, but you can readily identify, hey, my friend told me to take the Alta Vista Trail because it's really cool in the summer. But now I can see it's passing through orange and red terrain. That's 30, 35 degree slopes with a bottom line is what we just read. Maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I'm going to go to the Skyline Trail right in the middle of the screen, which stays on flatter terrain and it stays uphill of all the steeper stuff, right? And so caltopo.com is a really cool way to look at maps. And with that slope angle shading, you can identify before you go out where the steep slopes are and you can avoid those. But not part of our original presentation. But I always like to talk about that for like 2 minutes. Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much for asking that. Anybody else? Bueller.
Well, Bernd, thank you for joining us
right.
this evening and
Of
sharing
course.
the avalanche education. It was excellent.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And
Okay.
for our students, Amy, Janet, Emma, and Serene, glad you could join us. And, it's amazing what NWAC does for us, like this education, as well as having a website that's really helpful. And if you're interested in helping NWAC be successful, consider volunteering with them or becoming a member or donating. It's a worthwhile organization to support. So I hope everyone enjoyed the evening. And once again, Bernd, thank you for joining us. And
Thank you all.
everyone,
Thank you.
everyone,
I really appreciate it. That was really great. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. All righty. Have a
Good night,
evening,
everyone.
everybody.
All right. Take care.
See ya.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jean.
good night.
Good night.